history is not a seamless garment. It has gaps and tears, some of them quite rough. The Reformers reached deep into the scriptures, and I think they reached deep into the Catholic tradition, but they were revolutionary innovators for all that. And a world came to an end 500 years ago, and the Western Church was reborn in an unprecedented form as Catholic and Protestant. New kinds of Christians began to appear for the first time with new names like Lutheran and Reformed and Anglican. But if God is alive and if he is creator, why would we think that the church reached its final form in 1517 or 1640? Why would we think that the Reformation marks the end of history? Why would we think that we would keep these names forever? I think we can't. Division cannot be the final state of Christ's church. Luther's protest against Rome was necessary, and we should reverently say that the division of the Western Church, like the division of Judah and Israel, like the division of heaven and earth at the beginning, was in some mysterious way from the Lord. Yet if the gospel is true, this division is at best provisional. Jesus prayed that we would be one, and this unity that he prayed for must be visible enough for the world to notice. Paul told Peter that refusing to eat with Gentiles was an offense to the gospel and an insult to justification by faith. Jesus is our peace, who died to make the two into one new man, in which there is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female. The promise of unity is internal to the good news. We can putter around with counterfactuals. What if the early disputations between Catholics and Protestants had been fruitful? What if Lutherans and Reformed had mended fences by 1600? What combination of theological principle, myopia, politics, and pride prevented that reconciliation? But let's stipulate that the reconciliation might have happened sooner. Regardless, there are signs that reconciliation is stirring now. For a century already, the ecumenical and liturgical movements have been chipping away at the identifying divisions in dogma and ritual. I've often thought it part of my vocation to play a role in dragging conservative American Protestants kicking and screaming into the 20th century. And yes, I do mean the 20th century. That wasn't a typo. That wasn't a senior moment. I'm not that old. More important, I think, in the U.S. has been the foxhole ecumenism of the culture wars. Evangelical Protestants, historically the most anti-Catholic sector of the American church, meet vibrantly faithful Catholics on the picket line, while Catholics realize that their best allies for combating same-sex marriage happen to be evangelicals. Old boundaries become permeable as theological differences get swallowed up in co-belligerency. What happens at the picket line is happening in seminaries and pastors' studies. These days, Protestant pastors read papal encyclicals for edification, and Western Christians discover unprecedented wealth, unexpected wealth in the works of Orthodox liturgists. From the Catholic side, Vatican II, for all its excesses and false moves, has made the Catholic Church sound more Protestant because it's become more attuned to common biblical and patristic sources. Swimming the Tiber has become a popular evangelical pastime, partly because of the manifest attractions of Catholicism, but I think partly because the Catholic Church is more hospitable to evangelical concerns than anyone could have imagined in 1870 or even in 1950. I think the most decisive signal among evangelicals is a growing revulsion at the divisiveness of Protestantism. The modern age has seen more than its share of horrors, but none is so stupefying as the spectacle of Christ re-crucified in our divisions. The only horror that might rival it is our complacency before this cross. The revulsion I'm speaking of is not war weariness or relativism. At its best, it's a recovery of the New Testament. Evangelicals are increasingly convinced that unity is a demand of the gospel and that we are complicit in a profound unfaithfulness if we acquiesce in permanent division. Evangelicals are finally making it into the last century. The living God, I think, has reached into the post-Reformation church and has begun tearing apart the sagging fences that have mapped our territories and discarding the badges that have named us. This is happening through the entire church. And for that reason, and not just because I want to honor the venerable academic tradition of challenging the terms of the question, I suggest that we should be talking about not about the future Protestantism, but about the church of the future. If our focus is on the future of our particular enterprise, I'm afraid we're perpetuating the tribalism that we should renounce. If we rebuild what God has destroyed, are we not transgressors? But what do we Protestants do in the meantime? What kind of church should emerge from the cauldron of exile? I have a partial wish list in no particular order, and since I assume this is a predominantly Protestant audience, my wishes are framed for us. What should the church do? What should it look like? What do I dream of? Churches where faith without works is dead is heard as frequently as justification by faith. Preachers who preach the whole Bible in all its depth and beauty, and who draw on the whole tradition of Christian commentary as they prepare their sermons and teaching. Pastors who form friendships with the local Catholic and Orthodox priests, knowing that they are one body. Seminaries where theologians are encouraged to follow Scripture wherever it leads, even if we have to admit that our opponents were right all along. Churches whose worship centers on the Eucharist, celebrated at least weekly. Churches whose members know psalms as well as any medieval monk, where hymns and prayers and praise are infused with the cadences of the Psalter. Churches with enemies enough to make imprecatory psalms seem natural. Churches whose musical culture is shaped by the tradition of church music. Emphasis on church music. Churches where infants are baptized and young children participate in the Eucharistic assembly. Churches whose pastors have the courage to use the tools of discipline with all love, gentleness, kindness, and patience, but to use them rather than using love and gentleness as excuses for cowardice and lethargy. Churches that honor the discipline of other churches, knowing that they are one body. Lutheran pastors who teach obedience, as Luther did. Anglicans who exercise discipline. Jolly Presbyterians with a reputation. Jolly Presbyterians with a reputation for levity. Pentecostals attuned to the Christian tradition. Baptists who love hierarchy. Liturgical Bible churches. Cities where all the churches pray and worship and labor together, where pastors serve the interests of the city, speaking with a single voice to civic leaders. Churches that take the pedophilia scandal, the upheavals in the Anglican Communion, the persecution of Orthodox believers as crises among our people, not problems for someone else over there, knowing that if one suffers, all the members suffer. Churches who recognize that they are already members of a church where there are some who venerate icons, some who believe in transubstantiation, some who slaughter peaceful Muslim neighbors, some who believe in papal infallibility and Mary's Immaculate Conception, knowing that we are one body. Let's call the resulting churches, as I did in my original article, reformational Catholic churches. Will they still be Protestant? Though they'll look more like Catholic churches than many evangelical churches do today, they remain Protestant in many respects. In fact, my wish list seems odd only to those who have lost connection with classic Protestantism. Yet, insofar as definitional opposition to Catholicism is constitutive of Protestant identity, to the extent that Protestant entails being of another church from the Catholic, insofar as Protestants, whatever their ecclesiology, have acted as if they are members of a different church from the Roman Catholics and the Orthodox, I think Jesus bids Protestantism to come and die. For either side, Catholic or Protestant, to persist in a provisional Protestant Catholic self-identification is a defection from the gospel. If the gospel is true, we are who we are by union with Jesus in his Spirit with his people. It then cannot be the case that we are who we are by differentiation from other believers. Some might take this as an exhortation to abandon the passionate pursuit of truth, but in fact, it's the opposite. If Rome is simply outside of us as Protestants, we can leave it to its errors. But if we are one body, Rome's errors are the errors in the church of which we too are members. And brothers correct brothers, and it works both ways. It's easy to criticize from a distance. It's much harder, patiently, to correct family members.